So you say you want an electric car, but you don't want something that looks like an electric car. Well, have I got a deal for you. Okay, so let's kick off today's episode with the obvious question, what is this? Because it looks just like a Genesis GV70. Well, it is a Genesis GV70, it's just electrified now. That brings us to another obvious question. Well, what EV propulsion? Because they already make the GV60, which is the donor for all of the EV bits that make up the EV propulsion for this. This is all-wheel drive, so a front and a rear electric motor comes directly from the GV60, as well as its 77.4 kilowatt hour battery. But huge point of information, this is not based on the same platform as the GV60, which in turn is based on the Ioniq 5. Now, why is that important? Because they carry over all the bits that make the GV70, which is a small crossover, stand out as somewhat of a driver's car. Then there's the business of this being an electric vehicle. And there, very importantly, it shares all the bits from the other Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, 800-volt architecture cars, which means this has the same fast charging as those. So to go from 10 to 80% on a DC fast charger, it's 18 minutes. Now, in terms of the range, there we have a bit of bad news. It's not quite the level of like the EV6 or the Hyundai Ioniq 5, even though it has the same size battery. You see, this is only on offer with 20-inch wheels. And as we learned in many other episodes, not just with Genesis or Hyundai Kia cars, any car that has larger wheels, it's like dropping an atomic bomb on the range of the vehicle. So here, instead of being 280, 300, 320, like other vehicles from Hyundai Kia, this is 236, which brings us to one of the obvious advantages of an EV propulsion system, and that is instantaneous torque. The 0 to 60 changes here, even from the very quick V6 twin-turbo GV70. That was 4.9 seconds to 60. This is 4.5. So yeah, sliding a battery the size of a queen-size mattress underneath the GV70 does impact the weight. 5,083 pounds, or depending on express your weights and measures, 2,305 kilograms. Now, huge point of information, that is 630 pounds heavier than a GV70 with V6. And this one, the fancy one, is 100 pounds heavier than the most basic GV70 electric. With that, sport mode. Oh yeah. Oh, wait a minute, that does pull perhaps a little too fast for these roads that are stunning in North Georgia. Now, there is a trick going on here that's the same as the GV60. There is an overboost function, so there is no one behind us. Let's come to a stop. As a matter of fact, we have a stop and a cross street here, and let's go into overboost mode. Oh, yeah, it definitely makes a difference. There's more of a rush here, but the thing you notice is not just the additional power, the seat changes. So it's got adjustable side bolsters, so it grabs you a bit more as you're accelerating, but then interestingly, as it comes off the overboost, once the 10 seconds expires, the seat then widens out again. So little known fact, dimensions have a huge impact on design because they impact the proportions. On camera, you would look at this and say, that looks a lot smaller than a GV60. In reality, it's 8 inches longer, but the wheelbase, the packaging trick of electric vehicles, that's a little bit different. This is 1 inch shorter, which does have an impact on packaging. So if I were to get into this vehicle as a 6-footer, where I would sit, it's okay, it's decent, but not great. Then there's the regen, and here the biggest thing we have to focus on is there is a one-pedal drive mode. You do have to get it into a certain speed for it to work, but once you engage it, it does work very well in stop and go traffic. Maybe not 100% one pedal, but it's effective. So an interesting party trick that's sort of about packaging. This looks like it doesn't have a tonneau cover, which for someone who's from New York that lives in LA, that's a security issue. However, they have decided to hide it underneath here, so this way it's not rolling around. You can keep it out of the way to allow for more space in the back, but then pull it out and install it when you need some security. Okay, as the road becomes more challenging, let's you and I have a discussion about driving dynamics. Actually, really not just driving dynamics, it's driving dynamics, ride quality, And is there a personality? And at least in the early stages of the EV world, very few of them have them. Porsches have them, the Ioniq 5 had it, the Kia EV6 had it, and it's all different personalities because they're tuned differently. That Ioniq 5, think of that on the lower end of the spectrum. That drove more like a Lexus, where the EV6 and the EV6 GT, that drove more like an Audi. And then there was the BMW i4, that was definitely at the top end of the driving dynamic spectrum of an EV, meaning they had personality, they felt like a BMW. This, it's somewhere in between that Kia and the BMW. It's sharper in that it goes around corners, where the GV60, it's not designed to. Like, there's no roll here. You don't really feel that extra 600 pounds in going from a V6 to this with the battery. What you do feel is all of the bits that worked in the GV70, like the steering, like the brakes, all of that are tuned to work in this application. In other words, there isn't a situation where you're carrying a lot of speed and you get to the point like, oh my God, I gotta scrub some speed off, and you feel like there's not enough brake or there's not enough steering. In other words, this all works hand in hand with this being a sport crossover, if that's the best way you could put it. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant, an electrified version of a crossover that you and I already like to drive, the GV70. This for a base price of $65,850. Now that brings us to the obvious question. Wow, isn't that more expensive than a regular GV70 with a gasoline propulsion system? Answer is yes. That starts at about $44,000 US. With a V6, it's somewhere in the mid-50s. Then that brings us to another obvious question. How much is the GV60? Well, that starts around $60,000. So this is kind of like the pinnacle of the Genesis Electrified crossover range, at least for now. Now, there are two flavors of this vehicle. So this one comes pretty well equipped at the basic level with a panoramic sunroof, 20-inch wheels, even that vehicle-to-load system we've seen in the Hyundai Ioniq 5, where you can use this as a charger for a home, like up to 2 days. Then one can make this a fancier model, which this car is. The leather seats that come fitted as standard that are normally heated and cooled, this now becomes Napa leather. The headliner changes to a faux suede. The top of the dash becomes nicer. It has the 3D gauges, and it also adds a head-up display. That is an additional $6,800, which brings us to a retail price, base price of the Prestige all-wheel drive, $72,650. Now, two interesting points of information. Either vehicle comes fitted with the digital key as well as the biometric starting with your finger thing, which we've seen on other Genesis. And this is the first Genesis vehicle that is made outside of Ulsan, Korea. This is manufactured at the Hyundai plant in Montgomery, Alabama. And for that, we pay only $1,125 destination, which brings us to a total retail price of $73,775. So going back to the general theme we kicked off this episode with, the interior also feels like a regular car. All the details that work so well in the G70 and the GV70 work incredibly well here. The only thing that really changes, they change some of the color and trim. Like this specific white is only on offer in the fancy version of the GV70 Electrified. They changed some of the color of the trim here. But overall, the fact that they don't change much, that's what works in here, because all the tactile feel, off the charts. This is something that Genesis got so right with the G80, and then that's cascaded down to everything they make. Like, for example, this one, the fancy one, it's got the faux suede headliner, which transforms the interior. It picks up all the very unique design details, like these shapes, or the fact that it has toggle switches and rotary knobs that work throughout the vehicle. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of a rotary knob for the shifter, but here it works because that's the design theme. Okay, so what have we learned today? I would argue two things. Number one, it still has the driver's goodness of the GV70. Yeah, the weight impacts it a little bit, but not to the point where it's a completely different character. And number two, the combination of the way it drives, and more importantly, that it looks like a normal car makes it one of the better EVs out there considering the dollars, which brings us to the wish list. And here I have something rather pedantic. This is only on offer in 4 colors. They're all shades of grays and silvers, which for the life of me, I do not understand why they do this with such a beautiful design. Can we change that? But I am just one man, and this is the point of the episode where I turn it around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would greatly appreciate you sharing them with all your friends on your socials. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.